into warchant.com, and football's not quite over yet for Florida State, at least to a very small degree. And joining me to preview the 2021 NFL Draft and where some FSU players might fall in is Ira Schoffel, managing editor of warchant.com. So, Ira, had the spring game, we got the NFL Draft, and then it's the long, dark summer months until we get to, I guess, ACC Media Days, late July. And then we start rolling. But so this is the last thing. But it'll be a little bit more exciting this year. And by the way, you see that promo code below us, Warchant30 for 30 free day trial. Give it a shot. You're going to love it. And if you're watching this video, you see that thumbs up, man. Hit that thing for us. That helps us out quite a bit. And so let's talk about this a little bit, Ira. So on Thursday, next Thursday, we've got the NFL Draft. And, last year, crazy, one FSU player drafted. He by the end of the year, Cam Akers pretty darn good for the Rams. But, it's been a little bit. I guess Brian Burns, the last first-round pick. So I want to jump into this here a little bit and talk about some of these guys. We've got a complete story on warchant.com. Basically, there's 6 guys. If you look online, every analyst, every service, they go through all their mock drafts, everything else. There's basically 6 FSU guys that look like have a good chance to be drafted this year. So I want to go through some of them. If you want to get all of them, you got to go to warchant.com. So let's start out talking about one that I think we're pretty darn sure will be drafted, and that is, of course, Asante Samuel Jr., Ira. And right now showing a little bit of him on there, and was graded the highest out of anybody on the defense in terms of the PFF grade. And you see that right there. Had an 81.8 PFF, which is really solid, obviously, for anybody. And some if you look at some of the mock drafts as of late, he's creeping up. A lot of people are now having him going late in the first round, Iron. You've got to obviously cover Asante the last few years. Kind of what's your take on him? How do you think, without being, I know some people want to pretend to be NFL scouts, but just watching a guy and watching use the NFL, how do you think he will translate to the next level?
I think he's one of those guys that you feel like if he was 6'1" or even 6 feet tall, I think he's a surefire, probably top half of the first round draft. I mean, he's a complete cornerback. He's obviously very explosive, has good instincts. You talk to people around the program, they just rave about his dedication, his work ethic. And I think one of the things that really stood out to me, I don't know how much NFL scouts take this into consideration or NFL GMs, but one thing that really impressed me during his time at Florida State was when everything else was going poorly, you had coaching changes, the team was going through tough times. Other players at his position were injured. They didn't get much of a pass rush this past season. All these different things that could affect his play never seemed to. And that's the one thing that FSU's coaches have been real impressed by with him is that no matter what else is happening, he is a guy that is always focused, always locked in, always does his job and takes care of his side of the field. But as I said before, I think the one knock on him is going to be his height, and there's really nothing he can do to fix that. Other than, he's going to need a team that really believes he can match up one-on-one with some of these big wide receivers in the NFL. And if you were playing in a scheme where you could play a lot of zone, I think there would be nothing to worry about. He's a fantastic defensive player when he's facing the quarterback. He reads quarterback's eyes really well. He's got good instincts, can really break on the ball. But, the concern I think teams are going to have is just, he doesn't have great size. And some players overcome that. But it's certainly something that NFL teams are going to have to weigh into it, into the equation.
Yeah, what's interesting, and you're right, it's funny you mentioned the size and reading all the various scouting reports and everything on him, and that's pretty much the only negative really people found about him. And there were some comments, hey, he's physical, but he's average in run support. But then they go on to say, well, for his size, actually, he's not too bad when it comes to that. You can see the grades. He's been solid against the run for most of his career at Florida State. Obviously, he's got the bloodlines. He's got all the tangibles and intangibles you mentioned to be. So he's a guy you think can have a long, fruitful career in the NFL.
I definitely do. And, one of the things that, Jimbo used to say when we talk about Greg Reed, who was even smaller, much smaller than Asante Samuel when he was at Florida State, Jimbo's philosophy was he didn't mind smaller guys because he felt like they've always played against bigger guys their whole lives, and they're used to overcompensating for that and have figured out a way to compete at that level. And he thinks they can do it at the next level as well. So I think, Asante is one of those guys that he's just going to need somebody to believe in him. There's, again, from a so much of, how long you last in the NFL is how much you prepare, how much better you get, how you take care of yourself, how seriously you are. I mean, we've seen a lot of guys from Florida State and other programs, obviously, that have gone to the NFL and not lasted as long because they didn't take it as seriously. They didn't have a professional mindset. Asante is one of those guys where that's like a check
Yeah.
plus in that category. So that's something that I think is going to, no matter where he gets picked. I mean, I think you've seen mock drafts with him in the first round, at the lower side, maybe the top of the second round. But I think he's a guy that's going to play a long time.
Yeah, we've got a complete breakdown. If you go to the story on warchant.com, what we have there is I've gone through the various mock drafts and tell you kind of where the range is and kind of who's picked them the highest and the lowest. But you're right, it's late first round, mid second round at the worst. And I think the highest was the Pittsburgh Steelers with their first round pick, which is number 24 overall. So that'd be great if you could end up Pittsburgh. Obviously, a pretty successful program there, and they need some help there. And one of the things you mentioned about his size, anybody who watches the NFL is seeing more and more of these teams just utilizing these slot receivers, and he might be the perfect kind of player to be in that position to do that, where he's not put out in space against these these 6'3", 6'4", the DK Metcalfs, those kind of players might be a little difficult for a guy like Asante. At some point, that physicality and size does come into play. So let's move on to another defensive back, Ira, and this is a very interesting one because we heard it, and he was going pro the year before last. There's no doubt. I'm talking about Hamsah Nasirildeen. There was a lot of buzz on him late in the year that he was going to be, a pretty high. Some of the mock drafts I saw had him second round, and usually that high guys go out. So he was probably on his way to go out. Obviously suffers the ACL tear in the Florida game, and then rehabbed. A lot of fans were very frustrated, but he did come back. I think it was important that he was able to come back and play the last two games. A lot of difference of opinion. We've got a complete rundown in our story about where he's going to be drafted. Because Ira, you look at the size. I saw that very first game he came out and played against Alabama. You saw the range from sideline to sideline. He can do that. Is he an elite cover guy? No, but I think he's solid enough to cover running backs, tight ends, and those kind of things, which would probably be his primary duty. So a lot of interest here, but to me, the biggest negative everybody talked that I saw that references was the injury. Sure, he played 2 games, but I mean, obviously that's a red flag to come off an ACL. And if you're an NFL GM, probably not going to draft a guy too high if he's got that kind of a red flag going.
Yeah, it's really unfortunate. And, we liked Hamsah a lot when he was here. He was really good to deal with and always heard good things about him around the program. And as you said, if he doesn't get injured in that Florida game, he had over 100 tackles that season in, I think, 11 games. The year before, he led the team with over 90 tackles. Such a super productive player at the safety position. And, I do think he would have been at least a second-round pick. And then coming back this past season, if he had come back quickly from the ACL and had a good, strong senior season, there was talk he could be a first-round pick in the early projections. But it just took him a while to get back from the ACL. And the ACL happened so late in the season at the end of November that it took him a little while to get back. And I think he had a couple minor setbacks in the rehab. And as you said, he came back, played late in the season, and played really well. I mean, the nice thing about it, if you're a team that is in love with his size and athleticism and his physical style of play, he's a real physical player. The fact that he didn't seem hesitant when he came back, I would think is a good sign, right? Like you always wonder when guys come back if they're going to look like they did before. And don't you think he looked like he did before when he came back?
Yeah, he did. I mean, he looked maybe, I would say 90% of what he did before. Again, I think, but that's probably just the fact not playing football for almost a year. I think not being in football shape. But I mean, I had no doubt if he played 2 or 3 more games, he was going to be the old Hamsah that we saw. And you see this, I mean, anybody who follows the NFL knows this is so common, the ACL thing. And guys come back all the time from it now pretty regularly. So I do think someone's probably going to get a pretty good steal taking Hamsah somewhere. And again, it depends what you look at, obviously. But I've seen anywhere from there's one that's got him as a late second round pick, but there's some that have him, 4th, 5th round type of thing. So, I mean, there's a lot of variation on where people think he's going to end up. I tend to think it'll be the higher because, like you pointed out, man, he's got everything you look for in an NFL safety.
Yeah, and he's another guy that's just very, conscientious. I mean, in terms of a good teammate, that was one of the things that was really cool from an intangible standpoint. When they went on the road this past season, when he was not able to play, they took him on the road on all those road trips, even though he's injured, which they don't often do. because they wanted him around the team. They thought he was such a positive a guy that could help the players on the sideline, that they even took him on the road to games where they knew he was not going to play. So just speaks to what again, at the end of the day, the NFL, it's all about what you can do physically, but the intangibles do matter, and I think he's another guy that is real strong in that category.
The last guy I want to talk about today, and we've got 6 guys profiled on the story on Warchant.com. We're not going to give it all away. You got to read some of it, but let's talk about a guy that's just. There's a couple guys that's really odd when you read these things. People don't know what to make of them because a lot of these guys are some of the measurables. I think 2 of the guys you really talk about are Joshua Kando and Tamorrion Terry. Guys, you look at the measurables, you look at the athleticism of these 2 guys. We're going to talk about Terry here. I mean, we've seen when he gets to that second gear down the field with that size, man, he's elite. He's ridiculous. But all the time, we've never saw a great route tree. He didn't seem to have really good routes. He saw a lot of drops. And obviously, I think it hurt him this last year, Ira. There were some attitude issues, it seemed like. I mean, obviously, some of the social media stuff was not a good look. He had a little verbal altercation with Ron Dugans on the sideline. I think that was the Miami game last year. That's something NFL coaches probably don't like to see. And then, opting out or being kicked out or whatever kind of happened there at the end of the year obviously was not a good look either. Again, people are all over the board where he's going to go. He's your classic boomer bust guy. I wouldn't be surprised in a couple of years, man, if he's an elite guy. He's borderline Pro Bowler. I wouldn't be surprised if he washes out and doesn't make a team.
Yeah, I mean it's definitely going to be a risk, and it's what's going to cost him a lot of money up front because you would assume nobody's going to invest too much and too high of a pick in a guy with as many concerns as you mentioned. And then on top of that, he was banged up last season, so. Yeah. He also has a little bit of an injury concern that they'll have to evaluate. But in terms of physical ability, yeah, the guy's got it. There's no question. He's also been productive. I mean, he wasn't last season, but his sophomore year, I think he had about 1,000 yards receiving, which is a big number. And obviously is a home run threat. But to your point, the lack of consistency in running other routes is going to be a concern. I mean, I remember talking to former FSU receiver Kes McCorvey at one point. We were talking about Randy Moss, and he was saying Randy Moss is like the only guy that could just run a 9 route all day, and that's fine. That's all we need you to do, Randy. You just run fly routes, and you're going to catch a couple touchdowns and 150 yards receiving. But all the rest of the mere mortals need to be able to run different routes and be able to maneuver the entire offense, learn the entire offense, be able to execute it. And so I don't know if Tamorrion, he's not Randy Moss, so he's going to have to step up his game and prove to these teams that he can do more than just run fly routes because that's not going to get it done at that level.
Yeah, but at 6'3", he measured in at 6'3", 207. Now he did run it good. I mean, for a guy who's that big, ran a 4.44 at Pro Day. That's really good. It's not elite. What I saw? I think wasn't there the MPH meter on him for the Sun Bowl the one time, and he was supposedly up there with Tyreek Hill and guys like that running to that speed. He didn't display that at Pro Day. So I thought if he runs in the 4.3, then I think he becomes that freak status. I don't think he's quite there. He's above average speed for his size. But I think you're right. There's so many red flags. But when you get that size and speed, somebody is going to take a chance on you to make a team and maybe make an impact.
Yeah, and the other thing about the off the field stuff and kind of getting into coaches, the one thing I would say is I never really heard people saying that he was a bad guy or trouble. It's not like he was. Sometimes when you have character questions, it's a guy that you're really concerned about. It's going to embarrass the organization, or is just not a good guy or a good person. I don't think it's not that. Most of the time with Tamorrion, it seemed like it was just emotions would get the best of him. He would get frustrated. He would get in his feelings about different things, and things would boil over. But it's not like he's a guy that, there have been, guys you see come through college programs that have real character issues, and an NFL team that's going to cause them to not draft him. I don't think Tamorrion's issues are to that level, but he does have to grow up and be mature because, at that level, they've got plenty of other guys who will do the job and don't bring that, baggage to the table.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think it's more of I shouldn't have said off the field. It's more of a maturity issue, I think, than really off the field issue. No criminal problems you never heard yet, stuff like that. Too many suspensions, those kind of things. So, I mean, on the whole, not too bad in that regard, but could definitely be better. Well, obviously, if you go to the Warchant.com, we're going to talk about all 6 of these guys, including Marvin Wilson and Janarius Robinson, who we did not mention here today. But yeah, for Tamorrion, if you go to the end of last year, he was projected as a 3rd-round pick. Obviously, he came back, and now it looks like 5th or 6th round in most of the mock drafts. So obviously, some of those NFL GMs are seeing those red flags. And like you said, I think the biggest thing is just the inconsistency, the lack of being able to run more than one route consistently well. I mean, that's going to play into it as well. So got a lot more for that on warchant.com. Ira, appreciate you joining us today, and plenty more leading up to next Thursday's NFL draft we'll have for you right here on warchant.com.